The Buddha, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, Satipatthana. Welcome back everyone to Mind Podcast. In this video, I explain the four foundations of mindfulness and the methods of practice based on the Buddha's instructions recorded in the sutra of the same name. First of all, practicing the four foundations of mindfulness is not the only path to enlightenment, as some overzealous scholars and translators have claimed. According to the Buddha, the only path to enlightenment is the Noble Eightfold Path. The four foundations of mindfulness are part of the seventh factor in the Noble Eightfold Path. If someone practices the path in parts, such as only focusing on the four foundations of mindfulness, without practicing the other seven factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, they will not achieve enlightenment. This is akin to trying to bake a cake using just one ingredient, like flour alone, which will not create a delicious cake with a variety of flavors. For this reason, the explanation of the four foundations of mindfulness in this book is given in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path, guiding on how the other seven factors are prerequisites and support for the meditation practice of the four foundations of mindfulness. Some scholars have also claimed that the meditation method of the four foundations of mindfulness, i.e., mindfulness meditation, is unique to Buddhism and was the Buddha's invention, which enabled him and the subsequent arahants to achieve enlightenment. However, this claim is inaccurate. As I explain in this chapter, the meditation on the four foundations of mindfulness is simply being mindful and attentive to the body, sensations, mental states, and mental objects. Since ancient times, intelligent individuals who enjoy exploration have always focused their attention on various natural phenomena to understand their meanings. The investigative nature is not unique to Buddhism. It is a characteristic of humanity and living beings in their survival endeavors from ancient times. In fact, the original meditation of Buddhism is rooted in the practice of jhana, absorption, which we now call concentration meditation. Achieving a state of jhana requires a very delicate balance in the way we live. This balance is called the middle way. The middle way philosophy was not endorsed by the ascetics and others at that time. For instance, the Buddha's 5 ascetic friends disdained him when he began to practice according to the middle way. The original method of the Buddha involved using the experience of jhana meditation to strengthen the investigation and enhance mindfulness. Right concentration supports right mindfulness. Preparing for the four foundations of mindfulness meditation. The term four foundations of mindfulness has been translated as such, but a more accurate and meaningful translation could be the four objectives of mindfulness. This is because the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra provides guidance on the places where practitioners should direct their mindfulness. If we think of mindfulness as a beam of light, then the meditation on the four foundations of mindfulness teaches practitioners where to shine that beam to illuminate the truths leading to enlightenment. According to the records of both versions of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra passed down to our generation, one in the Digha Nikaya and the other in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha said, "If one practices meditation on the four foundations of mindfulness in this manner, i.e., following the exact instructions the Buddha gave in the sutra for 7 days, they can attain complete enlightenment, or if not, they can at least achieve the third stage of sainthood, anagami or non-returner." Many monks and lay Buddhists have practiced for a very long time, completing countless meditation retreats far exceeding 7 days, some even for more than 7 years or a lifetime, yet still have not attained any form of enlightenment. Please do not blame the Buddha. Instead, re-examine the Buddha's promise. If one practices the four foundations of mindfulness in this manner, the practice of most Buddhists does not lead to enlightenment, as the Buddha stated, because very few people practice correctly as the Buddha instructed in that important sutra. Most of us practice like someone who buys an expensive, high-tech household appliance, unboxes it, assembles something, and then plugs it in. Boom! Something went wrong there. Why do they only start reading the manual after encountering problems? Why don't they take the time to read the instructions thoroughly and carefully before acting? Similarly, most Buddhists do not achieve enlightenment because they do not practice the four foundations of mindfulness according to the Buddha's guidance in the sutra. Buddha taught about 2 types of 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation. The first type is accompanied by the support of jhana, absorption, meditation, and leads to enlightenment within a short period. The second type lacks jhana meditation but still cultivates valuable insight wisdom, especially those insights that help the practitioner let go and draw closer to the jhana meditative states. However, this second type does not lead to enlightenment. Both of these types of meditation can be found in various sutras. Here, I will focus on the first type of 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation. The importance of concentration for the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation. Both sutras state that a person practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation needs to abandon desires and discontent related to the world. This was the initial interpretation given by Professor Rhys Davids over 100 years ago, and it has been stuck with that ever since. This interpretation is both incorrect and meaningless in terms of practical application. It has led modern Buddhists, especially in the West, to misunderstand the guiding sutra and perceive the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness as challenging and unattainable for them. According to other commentaries, the phrase actually means after temporarily removing the 5 hindrances. This interpretation aligns with the use of those Pali terms in other parts of the 2 sutras. This implies that the prerequisite for practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness is first to temporarily set aside the 5 hindrances. This is a critical instruction in the sutra that most Buddhists fail to follow correctly, which results in their meditation practice on the 4 foundations of mindfulness not yielding the desired outcomes. At this point, jhana meditation serves the function of temporarily removing these hindrances. The Nalakapanasutta records, if one does not attain a jhana state, the 5 hindrances invade and remain in the mind. If one attains a jhana state, the 5 hindrances cannot invade and remain in the mind. Anyone who has attained a jhana state will have very strong mindfulness after emerging from it, making it easier to maintain for an extended period. This is the result of the 5 hindrances no longer being present. The logic here is, when the 5 hindrances are causing disturbances, mindfulness is not strong and clear. When the 5 hindrances are controlled or removed, mindfulness becomes strong and clear, making the practice of mindfulness meditation more effective. I recall when I was young, before becoming a monk, I used to go out with a young girlfriend from university in England. At all the parties, the lights were usually dim. At dinner places, people would light candles to eat by. When we walked along the riverside, there was only the faint silver glow of the moon. Weak mindfulness is like walking at night. You can't see things clearly. At best, you can only see dark shadows. Some people's mindfulness is like this faint and weak state. They do not want to see the truth as it really is, because mindfulness will reveal some truths about life and existence that they do not want to face. Many people prefer to escape into dreams, alcohol, and drugs. Others flee from mindfulness by burying themselves in busy work. Only a few people are brave and honest enough to be mindful. The power of mindfulness. If mindfulness is like a light, then meditation is what brightens that light. When I was a young monk at Wat Pa Nana Chot in northeastern Thailand, I became very peaceful through walking meditation in the hall. I would walk while keeping my eyes focused on a point on the ground about 2 meters ahead. Then I suddenly stopped, unable to believe my eyes. The dull gray cement floor had turned into a magnificent painting. Many shades and patterns of gray appeared, forming a beautiful picture I had never seen before. It was like when a practitioner, with true mindfulness, penetrates the tip of a blade of grass, and that blade of grass shines with a vibrant fluorescent green. A small branch transforms into an infinite world of shapes, colors, and structures. It is incredibly challenging to describe this with ordinary language. Something insignificant becomes profound, and what was once dull becomes heavenly, filled with the vibrant energy of powerful mindfulness. I might be rambling a bit here, but what has been happening is due to the temporary suppression of the 5 hindrances. The sutras state that the 5 hindrances weaken wisdom. When these hindrances are no longer present, the experience is like looking through a car window that has been freshly cleaned, or like hearing with an ear that just had wax removed, or like thinking with a mind freed from the fog of ignorance that once enveloped it. Once you have personally experienced the difference between strong mindfulness and weak mindfulness, not just in theory, you will understand why jhana concentration is necessary before practicing mindfulness meditation on the objects of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The deep concentration state of jhana creates super strong mindfulness. If strong mindfulness is like a megawatt spotlight as seen on a stage or in stadiums, then the super strong mindfulness generated by jhana concentration is like the energy of a terawatt sunbeam. Megawatt equals 10⁶ watts. Terawatt equals 10⁻12 watts. If enlightenment is your goal, you will need super strong mindfulness like the one described here. Anyone who has experienced a jhana state will understand this instinctively. Or we could explain it like this. Weak mindfulness is like digging the ground with a teaspoon. Strong mindfulness is like digging the ground with a shovel. Super strong mindfulness is like using an excavator to dig the ground. One scoop of it is equivalent to a year of continuous digging with a teaspoon. The 1,000-petal lotus, I want to explain how to maintain mindfulness on a single object to uncover the nature of your own being, the nature of your body and mind. I'll do this by using the analogy of the 1,000-petal lotus flower. Recall that the 1,000-petal lotus flower closes its petals at night. In the morning, the first rays of sunlight warm the lotus flower. This natural catalyst causes the lotus to slowly open its petals. It takes a long time, many minutes, for the sunlight to warm up and open the outermost petals. If the morning is cloudy and lacks sunshine, it will take even longer for the petals to open. Once the outer layer of petals has opened, the continuous sunlight warms the next layer of petals, and after a few minutes, this layer will also open. When this layer opens, it creates space for the sunlight to penetrate the next inner layer. Lotuses with many layers of petals require a long time for the sunlight to reach each layer until all the petals open, fully revealing the precious jewel at the lotus's core. In the meditation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 1,000-petal lotus symbolizes your body and mind. This so-called 5 aggregate self that we often refer to as a being or an individual, this is the self that is currently sitting and reading this book. The sun symbolizes mindfulness. You need to maintain strong mindfulness on this body and mind for an extended period to open up the outer petals, the truths surrounding it. If the hindrances are present, wisdom will not arise, just as fog or clouds obscure the sun, preventing it from warming and opening the lotus petals. If you cannot maintain strong mindfulness on the body and mind for long, your understanding will only reach the outer layers of the lotus petals. But if you can generate strong mindfulness and maintain it continuously on the body and mind, you will begin to see the inner layers under a new light. Previously, we thought we knew what self was, but now we realize we were ignorant and understood very little about ourselves. By maintaining powerful mindfulness on the body and mind, the truths will begin to unfold before your eyes. As you practice meditation in this way, all the labels that used to define you will start to disappear. All the old concepts, such as who you are based on what you thought, or who you are based on what others told you, or who you are based on how you believed yourself to be, A, B, soul A, ego B, are merely the outer layers of the lotus petals. They need to open up to reveal the deeper layers of truth within. Names and concepts are mental fabrications from the past. They are superficial descriptions that have always obscured the truth inside. When the outer petals of the lotus flower unfold, we begin to see things we've never seen before. You will experience things that cannot be named or labeled with common words. These new truths go beyond the ordinary understanding that you have acquired through learning. Most of our perceptions are merely repetitions of what we've been taught in school or at home. Cow, dog, monk, sage are just labels we impose on objects and phenomena in the world. Thoughts, feelings, consciousness, and the self are prime examples of the mistaken concepts we have been taught to imprint into our minds. They are merely a pile of acquired perceptions that always obscure the true inner realities. Why use the analogy of the 1,000-petal lotus? Because there are thousands of layers of reality that need to be unveiled. The practice of meditation requires a great deal of time spent sitting and peeling back the layers of ignorance and delusion about yourself and the world. Wrong views. When the Buddha taught that the root cause of suffering is avijja, ignorance, he did not imply that ignorance can be easily peeled away. Ignorance must be peeled off layer by layer, like opening the petals of a 1,000-petal lotus flower. The danger you need to watch out for on your path of practice is that you might overestimate your own achievements. Sometimes your mindfulness may be strong, and it can be sustained for a long period, and some insight wisdom may arise. This may feel like the sun has warmed the lotus well, causing 49 petals to beautifully open, and you are now seeing the 50th petal of 1,000 petals. The 50th petal may be so beautiful and profound that you might think, "Oh, this is it. I've finally seen the core of the lotus." But unfortunately, dear practitioner, you still have 950 more petals that need to be opened with even more powerful and sustained mindfulness. You have not yet reached complete enlightenment. When the 1,000th petal opens, and it is truly magnificent and wondrous, you will see the precious jewel right at the core of the lotus. Do you know what this jewel is? Is it a diamond, a pearl, a ruby? No, it is emptiness. You will see the invaluable jewel of emptiness right at the core of the body-mind, and it is something you have never imagined and never expected to find. What you were hoping for was merely to see another beautiful petal. Emptiness is something entirely different in nature from any petal or any other thing. It is nothingness. To reach the place of nothingness requires the practitioner to have a super strong level of mindfulness, maintained on its target unwaveringly for a very long time. The purpose of the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation: to see the truth of non-self. A fundamental requirement before beginning the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation is that you must completely understand the purpose of this method. The purpose of any practice helps clarify the manner in which it should be carried out. When you know the goal clearly, it becomes easier to reach it. So, what is the purpose of the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation? The purpose is to see the truth of non-self. That is, the absence of a self, the absence of anything that belongs to a self. As stated clearly in the scriptures, mindfulness is established sufficiently to perceive only the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects. And this is not a self, mine, or any ego at all. The latter part is my interpretation of the next sentence in that scripture. When you have firmly ingrained in your mind that the purpose of the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation is to peel away the veil of ignorance, delusion, about self, mine, ego, so that you can see non-self, that is, the emptiness lying at the core of the lotus flower, then the way you practice will become clearer and more distinct. You will especially admire why the Buddha only taught about 4 types of mindfulness objectives: the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects, body, sensation, mind, phenomena. The Buddha taught these 4 categories of mindfulness objectives because they are the primary domains, the 4 main components that construct the illusion of a self, a mine, and an I am. Thus, the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation maintain super strong mindfulness on each of the 4 target categories with the purpose of dismantling the misconception of a self. If you have been veiled by ignorance for a long time and have mistaken your body as me, considered sensations as mine, and thus under your control, thought of the mind, the process of understanding, as your ego, and clung to mental objects as things related to the self, then the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation will help to clear these misconceptions. Summary of the preparation steps. Here are the preparation steps for successfully practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation, outlined in the table below. 1. First, remove the 5 hindrances through the practice and experience of the jhana states of concentration. 2. Attain the super strong mindfulness that is created by the jhana states of concentration. 3. Maintain the super strong mindfulness with focused attention on the target, objective, object of mindfulness. 4. Keep in mind the purpose of the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation: to perceive, realize the truth of non-self. Now, I will describe how to practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation on each objective, one by one, in order. Contemplation of the body. The Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra lists 14 parts of the body to focus mindfulness on. Each of these parts is grouped as follows: 1. Breathing. 2. The postures of the body. 3. Bodily actions. 4. The parts of the body. 5. The 4 elements of the body. 6. The 9 types of corpses. Here, I will briefly discuss all the groups, except for the first group. Breathing. In Indian philosophy, breathing is considered the core or essence of a human being. In fact, in Pali, the word for animal is pana, which also means breath. Similarly, it means to have breath. It is certain that ancient people considered breathing to be the most important part of life. They even regarded breath as akin to the soul, ego of a human being or a living creature. By focusing super strong mindfulness on the breath, we can experience that breathing is an empty process, entirely dependent on conditions and causality, with no one inside controlling it. Furthermore, in the deep states of jhana concentration, we can experience the disappearance of breath in the fourth jhana without causing any danger to our lives. When my teacher, Venerable Ajahn Chah, was seriously ill, he often stopped breathing. A new nurse during his shift was shocked to see that the Venerable had stopped breathing, according to the electrocardiogram. He knew that Ajahn Chah was nearing death, but he just didn't want it to happen on his watch. A fellow monk reassured him that their teacher was in deep meditation, as he had been many times before, and was not dead. Still worried, the nurse kept drawing blood samples every few hours to see if there was sufficient oxygen in his blood, as is normally found in people who are breathing. In the end, the oxygen level in Ajahn Chah's blood was still high enough to sustain life, even though there was no sign of breathing. The nurse noticed that even though Venerable Ajahn Chah had not been breathing for an extended period, the oxygen levels in his blood were sufficient for the body to stay alive. In deep meditation, metabolic processes slow down tremendously, and you use almost no energy at all. You don't need to breathe. So why do ordinary people always gasp for breath when agitated, nervous, or right before they die? Perhaps it is due to their deep attachment and dependence on breathing, even though they are not aware of it. Remember that the Four Foundations of Mindfulness meditation reveals to us that our attachment to breathing is completely different from what we previously thought. In deep meditation, when you experience the cessation of breath, you will clearly see that it is not something that belongs to you at all. From this insight, the attachment to breath is released. Postures and bodily actions. There are two ways to understand something: considering where it originates and considering what it does. Here, we analyze the body by observing what it does. When we think that we are walking, standing, lying down, sitting, or stretching, these thoughts are mere illusions. The reality is that there is no body or self that is doing these actions. Many masters in sports, arts, and even meditation have described a state of non-self, referred to as being in the zone, or entering the flow. When I met a famous Indian classical dancer I knew and asked her how she could perform at such a high level, she replied that she simply practiced diligently and trained every day. But when she began to perform, she chose to forget everything she had learned and practiced. She separated herself from the performance and let the dance take its own steps. This is a way to describe entering the flow. Once she was in the flow, she could move effortlessly, gracefully, and without mistakes. When a meditator is in the flow, they can observe deep concentration, samadhi, beautifully, seamlessly, and wordlessly. Clearly, you are only experiencing the process without controlling or manipulating it. That is anatta, non-self. You observe the postures and actions of the body with super strong mindfulness and quickly enter the flow, where all the postures and bodily movements are seen simply as a process of cause and effect, not as a process controlled by an agent or a self. You become a person who no longer feels the need to control this body much. You are no longer attached and can live freely. Many teachers believe that mindfulness must always focus on the actions in the present moment. This is not true. In fact, the word mindfulness in Pali is sati, which means memory, remembrance. Super strong mindfulness can focus on an object of past moments, delve deeply into it without losing clarity, and uncover the truths within. For example, in the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra, the practitioner is instructed to practice mindfulness regarding sleep. Even an arahant cannot be conscious when they are sleeping. So how can they be mindful of sleep? What does this mean? Some translators in the past have tried to resolve this issue by changing the meaning to practicing mindfulness of sleepiness, the act of falling asleep or being drowsy. This is incorrect. The sutra clearly states the word sleep, the state of sleep. When practicing mindfulness on sleep, some practitioners use their past experience, the sleep they had before, as the target and shine super strong mindfulness onto it. This is mindfulness that takes a past experience as its object. It may seem challenging to you, but it is very important and beneficial, as you will see as I will describe more in the section on focusing mindfulness on consciousness in the following pages. 4. Mindfulness of the body. I remember when I was young, my whole family was watching a black and white TV program that showed a detailed surgery in progress. My parents and brother left the room after determining that the show was educational science. I found it fascinating to see the internal organs of the human body. Years later, when I was ordained in Thailand and Australia, I also wanted to see real, bloodied corpses. What surprised me was why so many people panic at the thought of seeing a bloody corpse, often unable to bear looking at it. Although we all studied biology in school, most of us do not want to see the true nature of our bodies. Why should we be afraid or scream when we see entrails exposed? Why? Because we are still deeply attached and enamored with the body. This is ignorance, the cause of much suffering for us. By using our strong mindfulness to shine onto the components of the body, we will break the mind's habitual aversion to seeing the inner body, the mind's fear when confronted with our own physical interior. And after breaking this habitual mind, we see the body exactly as it truly is. It is merely a body. Various parts or smaller pieces come together to form a body while alive, and disintegrate when dead. It's neither good nor bad, neither strong nor weak. Simply, it is just a natural phenomenon, not yours. Can you keep it healthy forever? Can you prevent it from dying? If not, then who really owns your body? Certainly, it is nature that owns our physical form. A sign that you have truly understood the reality of the body is that you no longer fear your own death. A test to see if you have attained this insight wisdom. Observe how you react when a loved one passes away. If you receive a phone call informing you that a loved one has just been in an accident and died, and you respond with, "Thank you, I already knew. The day of death will come eventually," then perhaps you have truly detached from your body and no longer cling to it. 6. Meditation on a corpse. Meditation on a corpse involves contemplating, mindfully observing, reflecting on the question, what is the body and what does the body do? This type of meditation serves as an initial therapeutic solution, generates wisdom in the middle, and ultimately leads to liberation. This meditation is very powerful and effective. A corpse from an accident is quickly wrapped up and transported home, where it is washed, dressed, and adorned to look fresh. They decorate it a little to make the deceased appear as though they are happily sleeping, rather than lying down as a lifeless corpse. Typically, we don't want to see a corpse as it truly is. We tend to prefer the illusions, delusions, fantasies we create ourselves. This is unfortunate, and in contrast, ignorance makes us pay a much higher price. The slower we are to understand the nature of the body and death, the more suffering we endure because of it. When super strong mindfulness is focused, shining on a corpse or the memory of a corpse, it unfolds like a 1,000-petal lotus flower, revealing the truth beneath its outer shell. The corpse teaches you that this is what a body does. It ages, deteriorates, and dies. Birth, aging, decay, and death. That is the fate of our body, just as it is the fate of every other body. This wisdom helps us no longer be attached to our own body and no longer desire or be attracted to the physical bodies or beauty of others. The attachment and cherished view of our own body now fade away, and the lustful craving for the bodies of others also disappears. Seeing the body disintegrate and return to dust further proves that we are not the true owners of our own bodies. It belongs to nature, is born from nature, and dissolves back into nature. When we truly understand that nature is the true owner of our bodies, we free ourselves from attachment to the body, no longer cling to sensual desires, and no longer fear death. If this wisdom reaches its deepest core, you will never again be reborn into another physical form. Rebirth will end. Mindfulness of feelings. The second mindfulness objective is feeling. This term needs further explanation because it is more profound, and the word feeling does not fully capture its meaning. Even in other languages like English and Vietnamese, the word feeling has multiple meanings. Previously, the term Vedana was often translated as feeling, sensation, or perception. Indeed, Vedana encompasses two aspects: one, physical sensations, and two, mental emotions. The word Vedana in Pali means the nature of a conscious experience. Through sight, smell, taste, touch, or the mind, it can be pleasant, pleasant feeling, unpleasant, unpleasant feeling, or somewhere in between, neutral feeling. In languages rich with vocabulary like English and Vietnamese, people use different words to convey the pleasantness and unpleasantness of each sense experience. For example, when we talk about the pleasantness of sight, we use adjectives like beautiful, ugly, or average. When we describe Vedana related to sound, we may use words like pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. If we describe the pleasantness and unpleasantness of physical sensations, we use adjectives like painful, pleasurable, or numb, neutral. The qualities we like, such as beautiful, pleasant, pleasurable, or comfortable, are collectively called pleasant feelings, sukhavedana. The opposite, such as painful, uncomfortable, or unpleasant, are collectively called unpleasant feelings. As for those feelings that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant, or fall somewhere between the two, they are collectively called neutral feelings, upekkhavana, or indifference. It's important to remember that the qualities we perceive as beautiful, ugly, pleasant, unpleasant, good, bad, are not inherent in the objects themselves. They are merely perceptions from our own minds. These qualities of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality are attributes we impose on reality through our conditioned minds. In other words, a feeling is a quality we add to each conscious experience, which we perceive as pleasant, unpleasant, or somewhere in between. That is why the same object or phenomenon can be considered good by some and bad by others. Good or bad, these are perceptions of humans, of each individual, varying from person to person. When your mindfulness is strong and stable, you can contemplate feelings, both present and past, in an objective manner, rather than analyzing them based on your own likes and dislikes, preferences or aversions, acceptance or rejection. When the mind is still weak in concentration, samadhi, and the 5 hindrances are present, the mind reacts in the following ways. It feels discomfort, suffering, toward things it hates, dislikes, or cannot tolerate, aversion, and it feels pleasure, happiness, toward things it likes, desires, or craves, greed. These reactions agitate the mind and distort the truth, similar to how wind creates ripples on the surface of a lake, distorting the image of the fish swimming beneath the water. Truth is distorted by the perception of a mind that has not yet achieved right concentration and mature mindfulness. This is the normal state of our minds. This once again highlights the importance of meditation. Attaining a state of jhana concentration serves to subdue the hindrances before practicing insight meditation on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, especially in subduing the hindrances of sensual desire and ill will. This enables one to observe feelings with objectivity, without attachment, without bias, and to simply perceive feelings exactly as they are. The arising and passing of feelings. When the mind is calm and free from both sensual desire and aversion, greed and hatred, like and dislike, it will see that pleasant feelings are nothing more than a temporary pause between 2 unpleasant feelings. Pleasant feelings are merely a state between unpleasant feelings. Pleasantness is only relative to suffering. Indeed, happiness is just a feeling that is experienced relative to prior suffering. You feel happy because it is a contrast to sadness. You experience pleasure because it is relative to pain. Truly, the intensity of a pleasurable feeling is only relative to the intensity of the prior suffering, and the intensity of suffering or unhappiness is merely measured against the level of pleasure or happiness that you have previously experienced and now lost. Have you ever read the book by Jacobo Timmerman called Prisoner Without a Name, Cell Without a Number? It tells the story of the life of a prisoner in Argentina. Torture, electric shocks, and brutal mistreatment created unbearable suffering for the prisoner during his seemingly endless months and years of imprisonment. These hellish experiences were something no one could possibly endure. However, these horrific sensations were not even the worst part. When he received a letter from his wife, who, in an effort to comfort him, wrote at length about their happiest and most joyful memories, those memories caused him 100 times more pain when he thought about his current situation, being tortured and imprisoned in a living hell. As a result, he screamed in pain, a scream louder than when the guards electrocuted his body. This example perfectly illustrates that the degree of suffering and discontent we experience is proportional to the degree of happiness and satisfaction we once had and now remember. Indeed, pleasure is simply a relative comparison based on the suffering surrounding our life experiences. Feelings are not ours. Thus, we can see that feelings are simply created, conditioned phenomena, just like the way night creates day and day creates night. It is merely a dualistic play of nature. Feelings are far beyond your control or anyone else's control. They are absolutely not something that belongs to you, nor are they a self or any kind of ego. Understanding feelings in this way is attained through super strong mindfulness, that is, seeing feelings merely as feelings, completely beyond the control of anyone. This correct understanding gives rise to detachment and prevents us from reacting excessively to pleasure and suffering. You realize that there is no such thing as eternal happiness, nor is there eternal suffering. There is no eternal night, nor eternal day. A perfect heavenly world in terms of sensory experience is impossible. This is merely a human wish, and the concept of an eternal hell is equally unreasonable. In summary, the purpose of being mindful of feelings is to realize insight wisdom. Feelings are not mine. Pleasure and pain, comfort and discomfort are intertwined and are simply two opposite aspects of reality, two inseparable dancers in the dance of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. And thanks to this insight wisdom, desires become meaningless. Eventually, desire is abandoned, which leads to freedom from suffering. Mindfulness of the mind. The third foundation of mindfulness is the observation of the mind, or mental consciousness. This is the most challenging practice. Most people's minds are not trained enough, so they cannot even perceive their own consciousness, the mind's awareness. The mind is like an emperor fully concealed in armor, covered head to toe with 5 pieces of protective gear: helmet, breastplate, arm guards, leg guards, and boots, so no one can see what is inside. The mind's awareness is similarly obscured by the 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, which makes it impossible for you to see the true mind hidden within. To see the emperor, the only way is to remove all his armor. Likewise, if you want to see your mind, you must set aside the 5 senses. Here lies the role of jhana concentration, which suppresses the 5 senses and reveals the mind so that we can see it. Therefore, we cannot even begin practicing mindfulness of the mind if you have not yet attained any level of jhana concentration. Why is that? The reason is simple. How can you be mindful of the mind, citta, if you have never truly experienced it? It's like saying, how can you be mindful of the emperor when all you see is the 5 layers of armor covering him? Investigating and examining the mind is like examining and testing the properties of gold. Chemists who test gold must ensure that it has been fully purified of other substances, leaving only 100% pure gold. Similarly, before you begin investigating and examining the nature of the mind, you must ensure that the mind is pure and free from other types of consciousness, such as when the 5 external senses have been completely subdued. Again, investigating and examining the mind can only be done after you have emerged from a state of jhana concentration. Then, super strong mindfulness focuses on the experience of the jhana concentration just past. That is, the experience of the mind in the state of jhana concentration, where it was no longer influenced by the 5 senses. In other words, mindfulness will be mindful of the experience of the mind in the jhana state, which is the mind in that state without the element of the 5 senses, and that mind in the jhana state becomes the meditation object for mindfulness to observe. Only through this method of practice can you see the truth that the mind is non-self, that mental consciousness is always arising and ceasing, always being born and dying. It is not a self, not mine, not belonging to any ego at all, nor is it a supreme being or universal consciousness, great self. It is merely the mind, like a flame burning because there is fuel. Where does the mind go after enlightenment? A flame burns because there is fuel. The Pali term for fuel is upadana. A lamp burns because of fire, oil, and a wick. If one of these fuels runs out, the flame disappears. When the oil runs out or the wick is gone, the flame vanishes. When the flame goes out, it doesn't go anywhere. There is no heaven for the happy flames to ascend to and shine forever. Nor is there a scenario where the flame merges into some universal cosmic flame. It simply goes out. That's all there is to it. In Pali, this extinguishing is called nirvana. Consciousness too depends on fuel. The sutras state that consciousness depends on name and form, nama rupa or mind and body, and when name and form disappear, consciousness also completely disappears. It ceases. It reaches nirvana. It doesn't go anywhere, it simply ceases to exist, just like that. An interesting story recorded in the scriptures mentions that two famous nuns, Kisagotami and Patakara, attained full enlightenment immediately after seeing a lamp go out. The nature of consciousness. When you maintain super strong mindfulness on a purified consciousness, the nature of all types of consciousness will be revealed. You will see that consciousness is not a continuous flow, but rather a series of discrete and isolated events. Consciousness can be likened to a stretch of sand along the shore. From a distance, the stretch of sand appears to be a continuous line several hundred feet long. But if you investigate and observe carefully, you will realize that it is actually made up of countless individual and isolated grains of sand. There are countless gaps and spaces between the grains of sand, and there is no continuous flow between the gaps of two sand grains. Similarly, what we perceive as a continuous stream of consciousness is now seen clearly as a series of discrete events, with no seamless continuity between them. Another analogy is how, in Thailand, people often serve various types of fruits, but they place each fruit separately on a small plate, serving only one type of fruit at a time, such as primarily serving coconut. Other fruits may be served fewer or more times. First, apple is served. Once the apple is finished, they switch to coconut. After the coconut is gone, they serve banana. When banana is gone, they switch back to coconut. After coconut, they serve orange. After orange, they serve mango. Once mango is finished, they switch back to coconut. All of these are fruits, but each one is distinct, and there is no essence of one fruit that flows into another. In this analogy, apple represents eye consciousness, visual perception. Banana represents olfactory consciousness, smell perception. Mango represents gustatory consciousness, taste perception. Orange represents bodily consciousness, touch perception. And coconut represents mental consciousness. Each moment of consciousness is separate, with no continuous flow from one moment to the next. The mental consciousness, coconut, appears after each of the other consciousnesses disappears, creating the illusion that all of these experiences of consciousness are similar. To an ordinary person, there seems to be a common essence in seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. We call this common essence knowing. However, with super strong mindfulness, you can clearly see that this knowing is not part of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching. Rather, knowing actually arises immediately after each sensory consciousness arises. When a sensory consciousness arises, for example, visual consciousness, the knowing arises in the same moment. And visual consciousness disappears when the knowing, mental consciousness, is present. And knowing disappears when the sensory consciousness, like visual consciousness, is present. As in the analogy above, the apple and the coconut are never present on the plate at the same time. When one is gone, the other appears. That knowing is not self. Mindfulness of mental consciousness in this manner, seeing it as a series of separate, isolated events without anything flowing seamlessly from one to another, helps break the misconception that there is a knower or a soul always present inside the body, perceiving experiences in the world. You are breaking down the final refuge of the erroneous illusion of self, ego clinging. From the moment you were born until now, you have always firmly believed that there is a self that exists, that I am the knower. But this is not true. Now you see that there is only knowing, mental consciousness that arises and ceases, just like the coconut in the analogy above. Mental consciousness is not an entity or a solid mass like a fixed soul. The mind is a natural phenomenon that always arises and ceases, comes and goes, like rainwater bubbles. It cannot be a self, mine, or a fixed ego of any kind. Ultimately, we see a fundamental truth. Knowing, mind siddha, is simply non-self. As mentioned at the beginning, the four foundations of mindfulness is a meditation method taught by the Buddha with the aim of realizing the truth of non-self, the absence of a self, the absence of ego. The last two concepts of the self or soul are located in the ideas of the knower and the doer. You often mistakenly believe that everything is the essence of your soul, and you often think that it is the doer, the knower, or both. This deeply rooted delusion is inherent, having been embedded for the longest time, and it is precisely what prevents you from attaining enlightenment. Because as long as there is ego clinging, enlightenment is impossible. Because enlightenment is seeing the truth of non-self. As long as there is ego clinging, you have not yet seen the reality of non-self. Therefore, ego clinging is merely an illusion. You practice to see through this illusory veil and truly see that mental consciousness is just a natural process and non-self. Seeing this once, you become a stream enterer, Satipatthana. Seeing it at all times and places, you become a fully enlightened arahant. Mindfulness of mental objects. Mental objects, also collectively known as phenomena, form the fourth and final category of mindfulness. The mental objects listed in this sutra include 1. The 5 hindrances, 2. The 5 aggregates, 3. The 6 sense bases, 4. The 7 factors of enlightenment, 5. The 4 noble truths. I understand that this list represents typical mental objects as stated by the Buddha. However, other mental objects, such as thoughts and emotions, are also included in the category of mental objects, even though they are not mentioned explicitly in the sutra. Mindfulness of the 5 hindrances. As I explained in the section on mindfulness of feelings, the 5 hindrances must be eliminated before you can effectively practice mindfulness on any object. But how can we be mindful of the 5 hindrances after we've already removed them? As I mentioned at the beginning of the mindfulness section, mindfulness can take past objects or experiences as its object of focus. Mindfulness inherently includes the meaning of remembrance, sati, which allows it to look back at experiences stored in memory. Super-strong mindfulness can focus on past experiences and hold that past object until the light of mindfulness illuminates and reveals the true nature of that experience. For example, you can be mindful of the sleepiness and dullness that were present when you were meditating yesterday. What you will see with super-strong mindfulness is that the 5 hindrances are merely fleeting images on a screen. They are not yours and are not related to you in any way. The following example will help clarify this point further. An old classmate of mine went to Jamaica many years ago. He attended an outdoor movie screening where people could drive in and watch from their cars. He noticed that the movie screen was a solid wall over half a meter thick, which must have cost a fortune to build. The locals there loved watching cowboy movies, particularly the violent ones. When they saw their favorite character winning, they would fire their guns at the screen. When they disliked a policeman or a Native American character, they would shoot at those characters too. If the screen were made of fabric, it would be torn immediately. So the theater owner came up with the idea of building a solid screen, allowing viewers to shoot at whichever characters they liked without damaging the screen. The audience clearly mistook the images on the wall for reality, which is why they wanted to shoot. However, if they had mindfulness, they would realize that these images have nothing to do with them, since they are just fleeting frames, one after another, creating the appearance of moving characters and scenes in the movie. When you recognize that the hindrances are just like the images on the screen of your mind, they will no longer bother you. You now know their tricks. And then you will be free. Mindfulness of thoughts. Thoughts, inner dialogue, are mental objects, and they cause a great deal of suffering. Thoughts can manifest as restlessness, regret, doubt, desire, or ill will. In this sense, thoughts are at the core of the 5 hindrances. Prolonged negative thoughts can lead to depression, sadness, or even suicide. Obsessive, fearful thoughts can lead to panic attacks. Positive and wholesome thoughts can lead to beneficial states of mind. Thus, a practitioner will undoubtedly gain significant benefits by practicing mindfulness of thoughts according to the instructions of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Once again, only super strong mindfulness can see through the trickery of thoughts. With an ordinary mind and ordinary mindfulness, you tend to believe in your thoughts, get stuck in them, and even consider them more real than reality. A hungry person goes to a fancy restaurant and is given a menu listing all the delicious dishes. He devours the menu and pays the bill, then leaves. He is still hungry. He has mistaken the menu for the food. The menu is merely a representation of the dishes. Super strong mindfulness can see that thoughts are not reality. They are almost entirely detached from reality. For example, ill will often distorts thoughts into anger, desire inflates thoughts into lust, and restlessness twists thoughts into irritability or frustration. You see that the nature of thoughts is unreliable, even the thought within the very sentence I just spoke. When the 4 foundations of mindfulness meditation sees the true nature of thoughts as they are, that is a transformative turning point. You experience the fading away and eventual disregard for thoughts. The sign of this fading away and insight is that you can easily let go of thoughts at any moment. The evidence of such wisdom is your capacity for silence. In the scriptures, the term used to describe an enlightened being is Santa Muni, the silent sage. Santa, peaceful, and Muni, silent. Mindfulness of will. Another significant mental object I want to discuss here is will, or mental formations, which is part of the 5 aggregates, the aggregate of volitional formations, belonging to the group of mental objects. Mental formations are the force to act, the will to act, the drive to create. We collectively refer to it as the doer. It is the source of actions, the intention behind all activities. The will, volitional formation, motivates all actions, whether they are physical actions, verbal actions, or mental actions. Understanding the nature of the will helps break the notion of a doer or actor behind the actions, thus revealing the process as simply a natural phenomenon without any personal self involved. This is why understanding the nature of will is crucial in mindfulness practice, as it dismantles the idea of a self that controls or directs actions, leading to deeper insight into non-self, anatta. As I mentioned earlier, volitional formations, will, are one of the 2 final delusions regarding the self. The last 2 misconceptions, illusions, clinging, regarding the self, are the notions of the doer and the knower. Mindfulness of volitional formations, the doer, and seeing the truth of non-self is crucial to cultivate in order to attain enlightenment. Many years ago, I was a member of the Mental Research Society at Cambridge University. Each year we invited a hypnotist to demonstrate his skills, and students typically enjoyed attending the show. After putting a student into a deep state of hypnosis, the hypnotist would say, "This afternoon, when I flick your ear, you will sing the national anthem." And indeed, later that day, after coming out of the hypnotic state and being flicked on the ear, the volunteer student automatically began singing the national anthem. He sang alone, and everyone laughed. The most noteworthy part of this demonstration was when he was asked who told him to sing. He confidently replied that he chose to sing the anthem out of his own free will. This shows that even in a brainwashed state, the action manifests in the brainwashed mind as a form of free will. Similarly, you may also believe, mistakenly, that you are reading this book by your own free will. But that's not the case, my fellow practitioners. The simple truth is that you have no choice but to read it. Will is not the action of a being, it is merely the final product of a process. When super-strong mindfulness chooses the experience of the jhana concentration you have just achieved as its object, it will see that the will, the doer, has completely disappeared in the state of jhana concentration. The agent has long since vanished. Mindfulness of a state of complete mindfulness and absence of will allow you to see that the will, volition, choice, and the doer is not self, not mine, and not any part of me at all. Everything you do is merely the result of a complex programming. When I say this, many people feel fearful. They are afraid because the will which they have clung to for so long is now about to be discarded. Westerners, in particular, are deeply attached and heavily invested in the concept of free will. They have even enshrined it in their constitutions and declarations of human rights. You may ask, if there is no free will, then why do we strive to practice to attain enlightenment? What is the purpose? This is a good question, but the answer is already clear. We strive to practice because we have no other choice. There is no other path to liberation from suffering and the cycle of birth and death. The practice to liberate oneself from the concept of free will is actually the goal of the practice. Only super-strong mindfulness is powerful enough to penetrate through the barrier of fear erected by that delusion. And only super-strong mindfulness can observe the process of will and see its true nature. Like the thousand-petal lotus, when the petal representing the concept of the doer has been peeled away, you see what has never been seen before, that there is no one here doing any of these things. Will or volitional formations are simply non-self. It is nothing, it is no one, not a doer, and not any specific agent. From this point onward, desire begins to unravel. Mindfulness of emotions. The last mental object I want to discuss here is emotion. Emotions are the surface structure of the mind expressed and categorized into qualities such as sadness or joy, depression or excitement, guilt or altruism, anxiety or calmness, anger or compassion, hatred or sympathy, and so on. Emotions always torment us in various ways, and they often cause us harm. Emotions are mental objects, phenomena appearing on the screen of consciousness, and are part of the mental objects, dhammas. In this fourth group of mindfulness objects, in the four foundations of mindfulness, emotions are part of the phenomena. Many people cry while watching emotional movies, tearing up over the ups and downs of the characters' lives. But that is just emotion. The characters in the movie and the plot are merely scenes playing out on a screen. When you are entangled in emotions, you often mistake them for my feelings. People become so obsessed with emotions that they seek out sad experiences. Many people are addicted to watching movies and always carry tissues with them to wipe away tears. Some people even give up eating and drinking, burying themselves in a novel, crying so much that the pages are soaked before bringing their tissues to the movie based on the book. They become attached to emotions, seeking pleasure in both sadness and joy. They don't want to be free. They want to live in the unreal world of emotions. This attachment to emotions, seeking pleasure in sadness and joy, is a significant obstacle to liberation. When you realize that emotions are just fleeting mental phenomena, you can begin to let go of them. This realization allows you to see that emotions are not a true reflection of reality, but are like the images projected onto a movie screen, appearing vivid and real, yet having no inherent substance. The purpose of mindfulness of emotions is to observe them as they arise and cease, recognizing their impermanent nature and understanding that they are not yours or you. Emotions are simply mental objects, temporary and devoid of self. We also know that millions of people seek emotional highs and lows in a glass of alcohol, using the excuse of drowning their sorrows. But you already know full well that no amount of alcohol can truly alleviate sadness. In fact, the more they drink, the more sorrow they experience. Super strong mindfulness that focuses, illuminates on emotions will shed light on reality, allowing you to see whether or not you truly desire freedom. It sets your preferences aside. You realize that emotions are merely temptations that lure you into trouble and danger. By nature, they are just mental objects, arising due to causes and conditions, similar to how weather patterns pass overhead without actually being yours. When you see their true nature, you are no longer entangled in emotions and are free from their control and manipulation. Any object of the mind, whether it's one of the five hindrances, a thought, volition, or emotion, can be placed under the continuous focused beam of super strong mindfulness. There, you will see things you've never even imagined. You will see what the Buddha saw under the Bodhi tree on the day of his enlightenment. The realization illuminates that the events on the screen of consciousness are just nature's play and are not the work of a god or the possession of a soul. There's nothing there. There's no one there. There's no one home. The objects of the mind are empty. They are non-self. The veil of illusion has been seen through. The veil of ignorance has been pierced. Now you are free, no longer affected by any object of the mind. The Buddha promised that anyone who practices the four foundations of mindfulness diligently will attain either non-returner status or complete enlightenment within 7 days. Perhaps now you understand why so many practitioners have been disappointed despite practicing for more than 7 days, even more than 7 years, or for their entire lives without attaining enlightenment. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is because they have not practiced correctly according to the Buddha's instructions. Try practicing it for yourself and you will see. You need to cultivate super strong mindfulness through jhana concentration. Only then will you understand that ordinary mindfulness is weak and cannot succeed in meditation. Place the knower, mind, citta, and the doer under the powerful beam of super strong mindfulness, and be courageous enough to go beyond your ingrained views and beliefs. Then, just wait for the unexpected to happen. Do not, under any circumstances, try to predict or speculate about the truth. Be patient and wait, and eventually, the 1000th petal of the lotus will open, revealing the core of the lotus and the gem within. That is the moment when ignorance ends, the cycle of birth and death ends, and it marks the conclusion of the 4 foundations of mindfulness.